Charles and Camilla, people didn't really know them before. I think Americans, maybe you thought of him as just Diana's ex.
So now, apparently Americans didn't really know King Charles III and Camilla before their New York visit. Not weren't deeply familiar or less engaged. No, didn't really know them. That is not commentary. That is a polite way of saying, we see you, but we don't care. And somehow that hits harder than outright criticism. Because imagine spending literal decades positioning yourself as a global figure, shaking hands, attending summits, giving speeches about climate, architecture, organic farming, probably lecturing a tree at some point, only to land in the United States and get reduced to, oh, Diana's ex. That's not even a downgrade. That's a complete identity collapse. And the wild part? It's not even malicious. Americans aren't sitting around plotting disrespect. They're just uninterested, which for a monarchy built on attention is basically the worst possible outcome. You can fight criticism, you can spin controversy, but indifference? That's like trying to argue with a wall. Let's really sit in that moment. A commentator on Good Morning America casually drops that Americans mostly recognize Charles as the ex-husband of Princess Diana, and nobody gasps. Nobody rushes to defend. The segment just keeps moving like someone mentioned the weather. That silence, that's the real headline. Because it exposes something the palace PR machine would rather duct tape and hide behind a velvet curtain. The monarchy's global relevance has limits. Very clear ones. And once you step outside the UK, outside the Commonwealth bubble, outside the carefully managed press environment, the narrative changes real fast. In Britain, Charles is the king. The institution protects him. The media, even when critical, still operates within a framework that acknowledges the monarchy as central. There's history, there's proximity, there's tradition baked into everyday life. But in America, please, the monarchy is basically just another reality show with better costumes. And in reality show logic, you are not defined by your title. You are defined by your storyline, your most dramatic, most emotional, most unforgettable storyline. And unfortunately for Charles, that storyline involves Princess Diana. You can spend years rebranding. You can talk about duty, service, legacy. You can try to rewrite the narrative into something dignified and forward-looking. But Diana's story didn't just fade into history, it became mythology. And mythology does not care about your PR strategy. To a huge chunk of the American public, Diana wasn't just a royal figure, she was the royal figure, the emotional core, the human story, the one people connected with, the one they remember. So when they hear Charles, their brain doesn't go, ah yes, the Anderton X, the environmentally conscious monarch with a long-standing dedication to charitable causes. Their brain goes, that's the guy from that whole Diana situation. And that association, it's permanent. Now let's talk about Camilla, because her situation is even more delicate. The rebrand has been intense. Years of careful image management, soft appearances, gradual normalization, the title shift, the messaging, the effort to move from controversial figure to accepted royal presence. And to be fair, within the UK, that strategy has had some level of success. Not universal love, but a kind of reluctant acceptance. But then you step into the US, where people are not following the daily updates, not invested in the gradual narrative shift, not emotionally attached to the institution, and suddenly all that work just evaporates. Because Americans don't consume royal news like a serialized redemption arc. They remember the biggest, loudest chapter. And for Camilla, that chapter is still tied to Diana. You can't speed run public forgiveness across an ocean where people weren't even watching the steps in between. So when that Good Morning America commentator casually implies that Americans didn't really know Charles and Camilla, what they're really saying is this: your rebrand didn't export. And that's brutal, because the whole point of these international visits is visibility, influence, soft power, the idea that the monarchy isn't just a domestic institution, but a global one. But how global can you be if one of the biggest media markets in the world looks at you and shrugs? Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, because while Charles and Camilla are dealing with this "who are you again?" energy, there are two other names that don't have that problem at all: Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Say what you want about them, criticize, praise, debate endlessly. People have opinions. Strong ones, loud ones, sometimes unhinged ones. But one thing is absolutely undeniable. Americans know exactly who they are. There's no confusion, no hesitation, no need for a reintroduction tour. Their story landed. It resonated. It became part of the cultural conversation in a way that sticks. And here's the irony that probably keeps certain palace advisors awake at night, staring at the ceiling like they just remembered an email they shouldn't have sent. The monarchy's younger, non-working couple has stronger recognition in the U.S. than the actual king. Let that marinate for a second. The institution that prides itself on hierarchy, structure, and carefully controlled visibility is being outperformed in terms of raw public awareness by the very people who stepped away from it. That's not just awkward, that's a strategic nightmare, because it flips the whole narrative. The monarchy wants to present itself as stable, central, enduring, the core, the anchor. But global attention? That's drifting elsewhere, toward personalities, toward stories that feel immediate, emotional, and yes, sometimes messy. And Harry and Meghan's story, whatever you think of it, has those elements in abundance. So when Charles and Camilla arrive in New York expecting a certain level of recognition, a certain weight of presence, and instead the takeaway is, Americans didn't really know them? That's not just a throwaway comment. That's a reality check. It's the sound of the bubble popping the second it crosses the Atlantic. And here's the part nobody in those polished palace briefings wants to admit out loud. You can't force relevance. You can organize visits, you can arrange photo ops, you can schedule meetings with important figures, you can ensure the press coverage is respectful, even glowing, but you cannot manufacture genuine public interest. That either exists or it doesn't. And in this case, the interest just wasn't hitting the way they hoped. Now, to be fair, this isn't entirely Charles and Camilla's fault. They're dealing with a cultural gap that's bigger than any one visit. Americans don't grow up with the monarchy embedded in their daily lives. There's no built-in sense of connection, no automatic reverence. So the monarchy has to compete in the same space as celebrities, politicians, influencers, and whatever viral moment is trending that week. And in that environment, you need more than titles. You need a compelling narrative. You need something that makes people stop scrolling. And right now, Charles and Camilla's narrative, at least in the US, just isn't cutting through. It feels distant, formal, a little disconnected from the kind of storytelling that grabs attention in today's media landscape. Meanwhile, the Diana story, still powerful, still emotional, still instantly recognizable. So guess which one people latch onto? Exactly. And that brings us back to that Good Morning America clip, which honestly did more damage in a few seconds than 100 critical articles ever could. Because it wasn't aggressive, it wasn't mean-spirited, it was casual, almost offhand. And that's what makes it so effective. It revealed the truth without even trying. No dramatic music, no fiery debate, just a simple observation that exposed a massive gap between how the monarchy sees itself and how it's actually perceived abroad. And once that gap becomes visible, it's very hard to unsee. Here's the thing nobody in those polished royal briefings wants to say out loud. Recognition without emotional connection is basically useless. People might recognize a name in passing, but if there's no attachment, no curiosity, no reason to care, it just floats away like background noise. And that's exactly the energy here. King Charles and Camilla aren't being actively rejected in the US. That would at least require engagement. They're being politely ignored. And in the attention economy, that's the equivalent of being ghosted by an entire country. And let's not pretend a carefully staged New York visit was going to magically fix that. You can't drop into the one loudest, fastest, most media-saturated cities in the world and expect instant fascination just because you arrived with titles. New York has seen everything: celebrities, world leaders, tech billionaires, people dressed as Elmo aggressively asking for tips in Times Square. The bar for attention is not just high, it's doing acrobatics. So when Charles and Camilla step into that environment, the question isn't, are they important? It's, are they interesting right now? And that's a much tougher test. There's also this awkward mismatch between how the monarchy presents itself and how modern audiences consume content. The palace leans heavily on tradition, formality, symbolism, all very stately, very composed. But the current media landscape thrives on personality, relatability, and moments that feel unscripted, even chaotic. It's not enough to be important, you have to feel engaging. And if your public image comes across as distant or overly controlled, people tune out before you even finish the handshake. Meanwhile, the shadow of Princess Diana still looms like an unskippable intro. Her story wasn't just royal history, it was emotional, messy, human, the exact ingredients that stick in public memory. So every time Charles and Camilla try to present a clean, forward-facing narrative, that past quietly walks in, sits down, and refuses to leave. And for audiences who never followed the slow, careful rebranding over the years, that older storyline is still the default setting, which means no matter how polished the present looks, the past keeps stealing the spotlight without even trying. So now the question isn't just whether Americans know Charles and Camilla, it's whether the monarchy as an institution can adapt to a world where attention is no longer guaranteed, where relevance has to be earned in real time across different cultures, different audiences, different expectations. Because the old model, the one built on automatic respect and inherited status, that model doesn't travel as well as it used to. And moments like this, small, almost throwaway comments on morning television, they expose that shift in the most brutally simple way. No drama needed, just a quiet, collective shrug from across the ocean. Thank you for watching, family. I'm Smiley, and I will see you in the next video.